I've been actively gaming on PC for a little over 5 years now, and throughout this time I've seen many games rise and fall. New trends would start, old trends would die out, and the process would continue. It seems as if the popular trend for the last few years or so has been the rise of new battle royale games. Many games have tried to become the next popular one, but only a few of them have actually managed to succeed. One of the most notable attempts at this was a fairly popular game known as the Culling. I remember seeing this game when it first launched on Steam, and until that point, I'd never even heard of it. It looked really cool and like it would be a fun experience, so I began to look it up on YouTube. As I researched it a bit more, I learned that this game was actually becoming pretty popular, and it seemed like something that would take off and become successful. Bigger YouTubers began to cover it more and more, and it began to get traction and gain active players. As I saw this happening, I tried to get some of my friends to purchase it with me, but none of them really wanted to. They were all interested in H1Z1 at the time, and they felt as if this game wasn't worth the price. I ended up siding with them and decided not to purchase it. I pretty much forgot about the game altogether and ignored it except for the occasional video that I saw here and there on YouTube. A few months ago, the Culling quickly passed by on my Steam homepage, and I began to look into it to see how it was holding up. As I began to read the reviews, I realized that the game was completely dead, and development on it has been abandoned. I was honestly surprised to see how this happened, and I was curious how the developers managed to mess up something with so much potential. I decided to research what happened, and turns out there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about why the Culling failed. Development on the Culling began back in May of 2015 by a group of developers known as Xaviant Games. At the time, the battle royale genre was just being born, and only a tiny fraction of what it is today. The market wasn't oversaturated, and the company actually had a pretty unique and interesting idea at the time. Development continued, and on February 12, 2016, the company launched a closed alpha on their website. Test servers were open, and players were able to come on and see how they enjoyed the game. And for the most part, people really seemed to like the game. It was a game that was aimed at redefining the battle royale genre, and it did a really good job at it. YouTube videos were made on it, and people were really excited for the official early access launch on Steam, scheduled in early March. As the alpha continued, the developers did a great job at taking player feedback into consideration, and actually worked on quite a bit of pre-launch fixes and additions before it came out on Steam. Great progress was made, and the game launched on Steam a few days early, on March 4th, 2016. The player reception was really good, and the Steam post that they made announcing the launch had quite a bit of likes and comments. Everything launched smoothly, but there were two negative things that popped up. Since the game was an American-based game, the company only opened up American servers, which kept a lot of European and other users around the world from purchasing the game. Second of all, complaints were coming in from the most active group of players that it felt a bit repetitive, and for them to keep playing, the devs were going to need to add and change some things. But like I said, the reception was very good for the most part. Xaviant continued to receive feedback, and they acted on it very well. EU servers were open just 5 days after the initial launch, and a major patch was released to fix some of the underlying issues. 10 days after this, they also released servers for the Oceania region. The devs created 4 major patches with new additions and fixes that the community wanted within the first month of the game being out. Everything was going in the right direction, and as time passed, the game became more and more polished. The gameplay itself became that of a better quality game, but there were still many underlying technical problems that took place. The game frequently crashed and players would lag out constantly, but even this wasn't a huge issue because it could be overlooked in the hopes that it would be fixed in the future. The patches continued and new content was being added over time. New guns, clothing, mechanics, and more were being added to the game quite frequently. There was a really big update that came in July of 2016, and it actually added an entirely new game mode known as the Lightning Round mode. This new game mode was a whole different experience and was actually an update aimed at helping the players who were claiming that the game was getting repetitive. This new game mode also provided a new experience and allowed players to cycle between different variations of gameplay. After the release of this update, many of the players who were getting bored of repeating the same process over and over had some restored faith in the game. This single update helped to reactivate the player base that was leaving and to prevent some other new players from getting bored. This was the only update in the month of July, but since it was big and game-changing, the community really didn't mind. As the developers began to take more and more feedback and implement it into the game, the community had lots of hope that this game would become something great, and that it would be as popular as PUBG is today. And I personally feel that this could have happened if issues didn't arise. Have you ever heard the saying that too much of a good thing can become bad? Well, that was the case with the Culling. With every new player-suggested addition in the game, other players had the hope that their suggestion would also be taken into consideration. There were more and more suggestions of how players thought they could improve the game, some of which were just insane. The developers saw these suggestions throughout the whole process and tried to implement as many of them as possible. They were simply trying to be good developers and let the community shape the game the way they wanted it to be shaped, but it ended up actually hurting them. The game became an eclectic mix of player-driven content that really didn't flow together, and this random mix of items, game modes, and mechanics actually began to hurt the game and cause players to leave. As players suggested things that they wanted to be changed, the developers changed them without hesitation, without really thinking about the rest of the players and what they thought. With all the stat changes and overhauls, players didn't really know what was going on and what the proper way was to play the game. The studio continued to roll out tons of updates and patches, and it seemed as if every single one of them had changed something that was also changed in the previous one. This progress that was being made looked really good at first, but over time, it created a major problem. With so many frequent changes, the game became something entirely different from what it originally was. People bought the game for what it was at the time, so when the studio kept changing it constantly, it drove players off and caused many to quit playing. Even though the game was in decline at this point, it was nowhere near dead. There was still a decent number of players online at any given time, and a very active community. While some players did begin to hate the game and refuse to play it, it still had a good following of active players. Even though it did hurt with some aspects, like I said earlier, the great responsiveness and charm that the developers had was a major factor that kept this game alive. If you take a look at their dev blogs, you can see the happiness that they have in every post, and you can see how much they really loved the game that they were making. For an example of what I'm talking about, in their official October patch notes, they crack jokes about twerking ghosts, make a few puns, and just show how excited they seem about their new content. The charm is what kept this game alive for as long as it was alive, but some bad decisions would cause the amazing game that this charm was directed towards to die. One of the worst decisions that the developers made occurred in July of 2017. After a few more major patches and updates to the game, the developers decided to release the game on Xbox One. While this may sound like a great way to see some growth at first, it actually was one of the factors that began to kill the game in the long run. The resources in the company were now split between the Xbox team and the PC team, and since the company was already fairly small to begin with, it didn't really help the situation. It was a losing battle for them because of two reasons. First of all, it was because of the people who were just tired of the game changing. This group of players were unhappy because of all of the changes, and they said that they would stop playing until the developers stopped changing everything so often. The second group of players had the opposite problem. As the updates slowed down upon the release of the Xbox version, this group of players was mad that they stopped updating the game. This group claimed that since it was an early access game, they needed to continue to update it in order to keep people playing. It was actually a lose-lose situation for the devs, and no matter which route they took, they would still lose many players. At this point, the updates slowed down a lot on both PC and Xbox. It seemed as if they were more focused on Xbox updates, however, and the PC was neglected a bit more than the other. But they would in fact roll out 2 more major updates over the next few months, and these updates were actually very well received. Stuff began to kind of look good again, and the game was actually slowing down and was on the right track for once. But just as hope was being restored and the game began to gain back a few of the many lost players, the devs made a very terrible decision. On October 5th, 2017, the Culling launched out of early access on PC and from the Xbox Game Preview on Xbox. Being a quote-unquote fully released game, the developers no longer had to force out updates to the game, and they can leave it where it was and have no responsibilities. And there's nothing wrong with this route for a fully released game. But the issue was that this game wasn't really finished. Stuff was still unbalanced because of the constant changes, there were bugs everywhere, and optimization was terrible. But since the game was fully released, there was no need to push out any more updates. It was a get what you paid for type of situation. The player count instantly dropped after the release, and the game died almost instantaneously. Shortly after this, in December, the developers announced that they would cease development on the game and leave it as it is. They also stated that they were beginning to work on a new title and just leaving this one behind. There were not many players at the time, but the company said that they would leave the servers up for the few players that were left, which honestly sounded like a very respectable thing to do. But they didn't keep their word and ended up closing the servers with no notice just a few months later. This made all of the remaining players matched up against bots whenever they tried to find a match, and the entire multiplayer aspect was officially gone. At this point, the players dropped off even more until the game was literally dead and had 0 active players. The developers lowered the price to $5, which was actually a great decision. It actually increased the player count by about 2,000%, from 1 player on at a time to about 20. What a great move by a great company. Now, looking at the game today, it is still completely dead. Nobody plays it, and it's just sitting there abandoned with so much potential. And this is where the question arises. Did Xaviant do what they were required to do with this game since they brought it out of early access, or did they create false promises that they didn't fulfill and leave the players wanting more? Let me know what you think about this situation in the comments below. But guys, that is going to be it for today's video, so I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's any games you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments, and again, let me know on everything in the comments. What you thought about the video, what you thought about the culling, just let me know down below. Anyways guys, I will see you guys next time, and peace.